Get ready to tune into stories of average men striving for greatness, to become the leaders that are needed in their homes, in their career, and their communities. This is the Brotherhood of Fatherhood podcast.
Hey guys, this is Scott with Brotherhood of Fatherhood, and we're going to be talking with Theo Zhung today. But before we get started, as a man who desires to live up to his full potential as a father, husband, and leader, you need a tribe that will challenge you and help you grow. If you have not joined the Brotherhood of Fatherhood Facebook group yet, be sure to hop on Facebook and search the Brotherhood of Fatherhood. Join what I believe is the most valuable group online for fathers, where you can get practical and tactical advice and support to be the father, husband, and leader you are destined to be. Welcome to the show, Theo. How are you doing today, my man?
Oh man, thank you for having me. I haven't gotten this prepared since this clean. I shaved my head and everything since my wedding, probably. So.
That's awesome. That's awesome. I don't know how I feel about a man meeting with me and getting really prepared and cleaned up, but I know why you did that. So that's really cool. We've been chatting for a bit through the Facebook Messenger, and then we've hopped on some calls. You really started kind of, you actually sent me a pretty awesome message very early on in your joining the group. So I started to watch you very closely, very quickly. And we'll get into that a little later, because I want to really talk to the group about like what motivates you, and what you have some really, really deep things to share, and we'll dive into that. But first, I may have messed up your name. So it's Theophilus. Is that how you pronounce it?
Theophilus.
We're going with Theo and Zhung. Is that right?
Yep, correct.
Okay. So where are you from? Because I don't know many Americans that name their kids that way. So, or at least with, the American descent, I guess is
right. Yeah. Or North American. I'm
okay, thank you.
Yeah. Canadian born Chinese. My dad was from China. Mom's from Hong Kong. And the reason why I have this name is because they had me at a seminary in Alberta. And this little town of like 1,800 people at the time. I believe I'm one of the first Chinese to be born in this town. It's really, really small. You can call it a one-horse town. So that was the name they gave me. And so all throughout school, just being last on the attendance list, I'd just sit there waiting for my name to get butchered. So you've done a really good job so far.
Yeah, as a past teacher, I knew enough to ask, because I didn't want to mess it up, because
right.
I've played my role there as a teacher, messing kids' names up. But being the last on the list and knowing they're going to butcher it, is that like torture every single year?
Yes, like first days of school is always like, and my name, like it wasn't even attempted. It was always like, when it got to my name, it was like, I'm going to butcher this. So my name essentially was, I'm going to butcher this, because every single time they'd be like, I'm not going to say this right and ruin it. So
right, yeah, that sucks. Not that as you're going through school, your self-esteem is already pretty much in the garbage most of the time, and you're really worried about what everybody thinks. But why not have to go through this every year?
Right. Yeah. And that's funny, because when you say it like that, it's like I did feel like I was a recluse of sorts. I just didn't have the same upbringing as people. Mm-hmm. I grew up in South America, and there's just a lot of sides and dimensions to me that when I looked around, I was just like, nobody is like me. Like I just felt so like a sore thumb, really.
Oh, wow. Yeah. I think most kids, teenagers, like through those years, have those moments, those times, but I would say, like, being in your shoes, that would probably be to the extreme.
Yeah. Like, I mean, I was 3 when we moved to Venezuela. My parents were missionaries, and
I say there's something here that you're moving all over the world, because not everybody jumps into things like that.
Right. And it was super strange for my dad to do. Like, his English was not even at the place, like moving to Canada and then going to school there. And then like not even within 10 years of being in Canada, he was in another country already. And they only spoke primarily Spanish there. It was just, you stick out even more. And racism was prevalent every single day. Like, it was all the time. And so you were told you were different, and in a way that was not very life-giving. Yeah.
Yeah. So you definitely have gone through being a minority.
Yes,
means. Yeah.
absolutely. And I even in Vancouver here, I live in a predominantly white neighborhood. I don't live in Richmond. If you're familiar with the area, Richmond is kind of like little Chinatown, like of Vancouver. And so, yeah, I guess now I just crave to be in a place where I stick out like a sore thumb, and I just wear it. And now I have people call me Theophilus or call me, by my real name. And it used to be that I was called Teddy. And actually that what made kind of predominantly through school later on, that I was wearing my nickname, and it actually ended up on attendance lists, which was strange. And then after people found out it was Theophilus, it went back, and people were just like calling me that all the time. So.
Wow. Yeah. The things that, a lot of us just don't think of day in and day out, like the perspective, it can be so really eye-opening. Cause like I said earlier, like I'm not here to justify anybody or anything, but even just being a teenager or a kid, you feel different than everybody else. At least I did. And I know a lot of kids really struggle with that. And to have, a little bit of fire or a lot of fire kind of poured on that, it's got to be a real struggle.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And this is, I have a story for that, because like COVID is a good example. Early on, people were saying, oh, this is a China virus and whatnot. And because I said, we live in a predominantly, white neighborhood. And so my son did kindergarten last year. He missed a ton of school because he was, having coughs and all these symptoms lists that they said, if your kid has it, don't send him to school. And so he missed more than half of his school year. And actually at one point, the principal actually gave us a call. She was like, hey, like I see your son is missing a lot of school. Is there a way we can transition him into a kind of like a part online, part, physical school? And, she was a Caucasian principal. And, I just told her, hey lady, like, we're Asian here. And so you don't see, like, if I bring my son to school and he coughs and a parent sees that, word's going to spread that there's this little Chinese kid in our school who's potentially got COVID. And I didn't want to even entertain the fact that he'd probably get bullied. Like, just people would see us different and stay away from us. And so when she saw that from that angle, she was like, wow, I didn't even think of that. Like that's not something that would occur to me, right. I guess. And so, yeah, it's something that I'm super hypersensitive to now. It's like, and I think that also helps me to understand people better is there's just too many factors for us to make a basis decision or judgment of who that person or what that person is or what their future is going to look like, et cetera.
Yeah, this might sound challenging, so brace yourself. Do you feel like that kind of decision and that kind of walking your kid, or maybe protecting them? And I'm trying to play devil's advocate. I'm not very good at it because I just think it's really important to ask questions.
Yeah.
I've worked really hard at changing my mindset about letting my kids go through some really hard things so that I can teach them that is how we grow. Right. I talk about that a lot. Mm-hmm. It is painful, however, absolutely painful. And I have zero perspective on they're white. They're male. Right. I mean, yeah. I have zero. So please take that into mind.
Yeah.
But you ever think like, well, there's an opportunity to grow, but also I'm sure you're kind of, I'm putting words in your mouth, but you might be looking at age here because I don't know how old your kids are.
Yeah. So, I mean, he's 6 or he was 5 at the time. Uh-huh. And yeah, like that is an angle that I probably overlooked a little now in hindsight. Yeah, that would certainly, and not that I think there's probably some judgments I made too about the people in my neighborhood. Like the people in this city are extremely nice. They're very kind. I mean, Canadians, right? Not that Canadians don't have issues. We do have issues. Yeah, I think it was certainly a missed opportunity to be like, hey, like, son, you're going to encounter this on a day-to-day basis. There are going to be people who like to point out your differences and how you're not similar to them. But that's just something we got to wear on our sleeves. And this is what, gives us fortitude and makes us who we are. And so, yeah, I certainly see where you're coming from. And I love that because you're always picking my brain, always trying to give me different angles and it helps me to improve. And I think that's really what BOF is about, which I love so much.
Yeah, it's hard. And thank you for that. But it's hard for me to ask those questions. But I ask those questions of myself all the time. And I've realized that, like, even just this morning, I was telling my wife how I pray for my boys, and I pray that, one, they'll be protected, but two, I actually, it's really hard to do. Please put them in situations where it's tough and they learn and, and they fail. And that's like the hardest thing for me to do.
Yeah.
Because I don't want pain in my kids' lives, but let's be honest. It was coined as the China, whatever. I don't know what it was coined. I don't
yellow virus. Yeah.
And I just literally don't pay attention. It does look like it did come from China. I have a feeling there's some American.
Yeah. No, I don't doubt it either. So,
so, I mean, we can point fingers all we want.
Yeah.
But when everything circles back around, it looks like it's a very multifaceted effort here.
Yeah.
So I totally hear that. But it's just such an intriguing thing to talk about because I had zero, the closest thing I have, Theo, the closest thing I have is the fact that I'm 5'6". I'm short for a male, a white male. Let's put it. Yeah. That's the closest thing I have. And I deal with people calling me short, make fun of me. I mean, quite frequently. I'm a guy, I'm in my late 40s. Other guys are just going to do it. If they're not, they're probably not human. So that's the closest I get. Right. And woe is me, I'm short. But yeah, that's I love the new perspectives. I love the new perspectives. So you are in Canada, you're of Chinese descent. Your kids what nationality is your wife?
So my wife she's from mainland China. So she's grown up, born and raised all there. So
really?
Yes.
Wow.
And that's another story because that's like cultural stuff. Like I'm literally like a banana or like you guys like to say, like maybe a Twinkie, like I'm yellow on the outside, but I'm white on the inside. And so when I went to China, like, and this is part of the story, I guess, is just, we resonated together. She spoke English. I couldn't speak any Chinese. So it was like latch onto, I was a leech essentially. It was just like, who could I find that could help me survive in China? And so, yeah, she's a mainlander. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure that has it's a whole another thing, man. I don't even know how we got on this. I know you're talking about your son going to or not going to school. That was a big deal. Like my son would cough and he had allergies. It was really bad. Yeah. And he literally had a teacher say to him, like, hey, if you cough again, I'm going to make sure you stay home, which by the way, is not legal.
Yeah. Right.
And this was last year. And, and what we realized is there was a ton of stress around it, a lot of stress because kids were saying, you're going to give me COVID. And it was crazy. And we did make him stick through it. Hey, you got out. I have allergies. Yeah. I've been tested or whatever it takes to make people shut up. Yeah. But again, that was kind of light, but it was also a great learning opportunity. Like, let's talk about what that really means to you. Nothing. Yeah.
Right.
Nothing. They have a problem. Okay. It's such a hard concept to take a hold of.
Yeah. And it's funny because you talk about stress. Like I think, and I'm probably coming to a conclusion. I'm just coming to my own conclusion. Maybe your son is very high emotional quotient person. And so, when they can, and children are not dumb. They can clue into climate and how things are going, the environment. And so all that stuff just contributes to, some kind of coping issue. My son has the same thing, just allergies, skin issues. We could go on and on about how stress is affecting kids nowadays with everything going on, social media, devices, man. I've seen grade ones at his school with devices already talking about some crazy topics like that. I'm just like, wow, okay. You guys are already talking about this stuff. Just the world that we're in, it's, I don't know if it's more difficult than years past or decades past, but it certainly feels that way.
I don't think we can deny the stress and the input from technology. I would even go as far as to say, and I think most people, if they really thought about it, it's being used against us. like all the time. And I'm not a conspiracy theorist. Like, don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
But there is, okay, I do, like, let me be very clear. I do not care if people get the COVID vaccine or not. I don't care.
Yeah.
I don't think it's anybody's business. I don't give a rat's ass. But I hate that on Google today, my wife had the Google browser up on her computer, and it's each letter is a person, and they all have Band-Aids on their shoulder, except for the guy closest to the doctor with a Band-Aid on his shoulder, and they're raising their hand, showing their shot, and then it goes all the way down, and then that guy gets the shot. He high fives the doctor, and they all.
I've seen that one. I think I know what you're talking about.
Flipping kidding me? Are you kidding me? Like, good, bad, or indifferent, this is propaganda. I mean, it is all on. So what our kids are up against right now in their own, like, look, I want my family and my kids and the people around me to be free thinking. I don't want them to be fed by a machine. Social media, Google, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, they're all machines.
Yeah.
They all have an agenda for some odd reason, and they're feeding them. So the pressures of the kid right now, they probably don't even see some of that end, but it's highly, highly impacting them.
Yeah. And I think that this is the exception, you know, when we're talking about, oh, is there some kind of shielding that is going on here where you're kind of not letting him experience, you know, this kind of hardship? I think this is really that exception, is that it's a way slipperier slope to kind of open that door and give your kids that access to, you know, that kind of technology. I mean, we went so far as to transition them out of school, because it was just that it was like hearing those kind of conversations the kids were having on the way to school. We were just like, well, you know, school is a place where he's learning these great things, but also he's getting influenced by all these other kids who, you know, predominantly see you know, divorce as normal, you know, LGBT stuff as being, you know, really, really okay, and teaching sex ed in kindergarten. Like, it's just like, there's a lot of things that we're, you know, I think technology is one of those things where it's like, no, like, we really need to like rein that in. And as parents, we have that responsibility and have that power to do that now, because later on, you're going to lose that ability to actually control some of that.
Yeah. You know, this is a slippery slope of conversation, right? I mean, we could spend the whole time talking here. I think what we have done well and not so well, depending on the year, is, you know, just kids, hey, look, anything that goes on your phone, I know there's ways to erase things, but I also know how to look. Yeah. So, like, just, it's an open book for us. You know, that little thumbprint, we're going to be able to do the thumbprint, and then, you know, and then the big thing, like, no phones out at dinner, and the no phone times, and really kind of focusing in, because what I'm seeing, Theo, is families with 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10-year-olds at baseball games, football games, basketball games for my sons. They're playing they got their device, and it's on loud where everyone can hear it. Everyone now is being involved in this thing they have zero interest in, and the kids have zero creativity because they're just like, so, and that's, and boy, I mean, this is a rabbit trail for sure, but it's very scary. So you have, how many kids do you have?
I have 2, 6 and a 3, boy and girl.
Early young. Yeah.
Boy and I love them. The boy, girl. Yeah. When we had the first son, we were like, oh, my wife was like, oh, I really love it. You know, we'd love another boy. And you know, these are things that are outside of our control. But now looking back, it's like we're so blessed to have a girl. Like we just think she's like my little princess. And so, they're getting along very well. And there's just a lot of things. And I think for my own, you know, even for my own growth, it sounds kind of selfish, but like, you grow differently as a man when you have a daughter. It's just, there's just something about it. Just, I'm softer, more tender, trying to be, you know, understanding of her, and also realizing the enormous pressure and example that I now must set to show my daughter the kind of man that she should be looking for one day. Because it's not enough for me to tell her who to look for, what to look for, what are the traits, if I don't emulate those myself. I think the same goes with technology, is that, yeah, sure, I took him away from school to homeschooling, but if I don't rein in my own technology use, then my son is going to equally see that well, Dad, you're telling me to not bring my phone to the dinner table when I've seen you do that before in the past. There's just an extra onus on us to like live that example rather than tell them or use our words to convince people. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's so true. And it is the challenge there is real.
Mm-hmm.
I've found, my son we're doing a family movie and he's sitting there scrolling through his phone and I'm like, what the heck? But then the next minute I'll find myself I'm like, well, that's exactly what, like what we're modeling has everything to do with what we're, what our kids are going to do. So we have to start with us.
Right. My wife always like, she's really good at that. And she's really good at pointing those things out. And sometimes I'll like lose it and I'll tell my son, it's like, hey, like, why are you doing that? Like, don't do that. And then my wife would be like, later on, she'd be like, you realize that you do this too. Like, who are you to tell your son not to do something when you are emulating that? And so I'm so glad that she's in tune with that. And sometimes she doesn't do it in the most like life-giving way, but like it's something that it needs to be direct. And I think for me, it's a reminder that we are our kids, essentially. Like, your kids are us. Like they're mirroring us in every single way. How you respond to, drivers on the road, how you interact with other people who are not, kind of the same as you. Just, there's so many things to this that's, to me now in the personal development space, it's like, wow, I have very tangible, I make real tangible change in the world for the future. And there's a great responsibility. It's like, how I hope I'm not the only person thinking like this.
No, not at all. I mean, but I think it's the minority.
Let's be again, another minority.
Yeah, right. Well, let's, you must have had a very interesting upbringing. I mean, you've mentioned like 3 countries. You're in Canada. You were spent some time in China. You talked about somewhere in Venezuela, South America. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, and then you said your parents were golly.
Yeah.
Missionaries.
China. Yeah. Right? Missionaries so, also. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So like, it's like, that made a lot of sense.
Yeah.
So growing up, you were all over the world.
Yes. Yeah. And I mean, like, whenever people ask me, it's like, hey, so tell me kind of, how, like, who's Theo now? And so like, you kind of do this, like, do this rewind kind of thing. And you look back, how far should I really go? And so, it's funny because when you do that, and I go back far, we're talking about like 30, 60 generations back. So my dad has this like lineage book for our family name. It's this giant red book, and it has our last name, and it has, all the descendants we've had, and we've actually traced it back like really far back. And so there's a, very famous philosopher, his name is Zhuangzi, and he comes up with this thing called the butterfly paradox. You guys can look it up. I'm not going to explain it right now. But pretty much all the way till, my grandparents, on my dad's side, they were really high up in the government at the time, in communist China. My grandpa was a Supreme Court judge, and my grandmother was like the first female police chief in the province that she was in for forensics. And so she was really well known, but not well known. I guess like it's not on paper. Like it's like back in the day, communist China was like what North Korea used to be, like is right now, essentially. Yeah. And so she was one of 12 people in a room that embalmed the chairman himself, just to give you a sense of who she was. And so because of those positions that they held, my dad had an opportunity to, they found out that there was going to be this visa lottery to be able to leave the country to go to school. And so they got the head start. They knew this was happening before it got released publicly. And so he did his application, put in the papers, and obviously he got it. And they, in sending him off, they were like, don't ever come back. And so you can imagine what that can do to your psyche as a young adult. And he knew what it was like growing up in that era. And, the parents, my grandparents were arrested, and he had to raise his 2 brothers from the age of, I believe, 7. Like he had to like raise the 2 younger brothers He was killing rats for food. He was stealing people's livestock and stealing people's like vegetation and stuff to like feed the family. And that went on for a couple of years because there's this kind of like re-education thing. If you're familiar with the story of communism, it was a crazy upbringing. And so, he got to Canada, didn't look back, and ended up at the Bible college, met my wife, met my mom. And so they had me at the Bible college, and then just felt called after they graduated to go overseas abroad to Venezuela. Apparently there's a huge population there. And wow. I didn't realize that, is that there's actually specific cities in China which do business specifically with certain cities in South America. So everywhere you look now in South America, Peru, Venezuela, they all have Chinese populations specifically dedicated to whichever niche you want to think about. Your imagination pretty much. And so that, I was there from 3 to age 10, so 7 years. And, before Hugo Chavez, the really bad president, came in and kind of started changing things towards socialism and towards communism and what that is now. And so from then, from 10 to about 20, I was in Vancouver pretty much, just kind of jumping from church to church, kind of also left the church for a bit to discover my own way. And, I was trying to be a policeman at the time, kind of in this, like when your parents cast such a big shadow, it was really hard for me to like figure out who I was. So even though there was all these like polarizing cultures and places that I just didn't know where I was fitting in, it's like even more so whenever my parents cast this shadow that I was like even more recluse, more hidden, and just like generally misunderstood. So it all adds to who I am and where I'm going in life, and trying to find this, like, what is my thing? What is my life purpose kind of thing? I ultimately gave up on the dream of being a police officer because I just felt like adults, and I don't believe this now, is that they were too far gone. And then just chronic offenders problems in Canada are so bad. People get arrested, they get put in the system, and they just get pumped back out. And so I just felt that wasn't, a good use of my time.
Right.
It really felt like helping younger people was kind of my thing. And God really gave me opportunities to grow, and he, transitioned me to China. My dad was like, "Hey, you're not doing anything, like come with me to China." And, though I saw it as a vacation at the start, he used it to really change who I was, to really start that discovery. And so I went there because there was an earthquake in 2008. It's like the 13th deadliest earthquake the world has ever seen. Almost 90,000 people died. A ton, like a lot are still missing. And that really brought perspective. I've always been drawn to want to serve other people, and from wanting to be a police officer, wanting to be Batman, wanting to just serve others. And so I went to Katrina. Actually, it's funny because 16 years ago, right? That was when Katrina hit. I was there also. I've always put myself in a position to kind of help others and serve others. And so I was in China for a bit, and started, once we had our son, we started feeling like there's kind of a transition time that needed to happen. And so feeling like maybe we need to go back to Canada because, I wasn't able to lead the relationship because of the marriage, because I couldn't speak Chinese. I couldn't read Chinese. So it's like, even just basic things like reading like a menu required my wife. And so it's like, how do I make decisions in that kind of environment? And so made the decision to come back here. And since that time, it's really been just a slow discovery process of what is my life purpose? Like, what am I called to do? What is my identity? What are my strengths? And then pursuing that thing. And now I'm in this place where I'm able to and have this great drive to contribute to the well-being of the world by helping other men discover that about themselves.
Yeah, it's an awesome discovery. I mean, I think it's really important. I think most men don't go. I'm making an assumption, but in the circles that I've interviewed and talked with, most men really don't find their true identity and purpose until it's a little late, honestly. Yeah. I mean, that was kind of me. I want to ask a question because I want to kind of hone in on what you're talking about now. But your dad was it your dad that chose to go get the learning visa or whatever it was? Was it?
Yeah. So, I mean, I'm not sure who chose, but like his parents at the time were just like, there's this thing that you can, get out of this country, like get out of this system. Like, and go do something else, be somewhere else. And so my dad made the decision that, I guess, both ways, right?
Why would China want to do that? Why would they want to grant visas to go away? I mean, is it to try and implant communism somewhere else, or was it? It just seems like so counterintuitive to their messaging. And then he went back later, which is surprising. They let him back in.
Yeah,
especially as a Christian, that's just not
right. And yeah, that's a different story. There's a lot of intricacies to that story. Is why would China do that? And I think that comes from wanting to. Ultimately, it still wants to improve itself, and so there's no way of doing that by not having creativity. It's kind of like a double-edged sword for them, because on one hand, they don't want creativity for you to generate ideas that would uproot or overthrow what existing status quo there is. But at the same time, we also want to improve. And so, and it's funny because if you look at China now, it's very much like, is it communist? Is it capitalism? There's a lot of interlocking parts that it does kind of, you could even justify and say there is parts of capitalism in here. China is so developed, and now it's to this place where it's just, anyways. It ultimately was his decision, I think, because they knew what was happening in the country, and how there was going to be little hope for the family. And you got to understand, China is really on the lineage thing, where it's especially with the one-child policy, it's like your whole lineage is on your back. And so if you're the oldest, which my dad was, get him out so you can get us out, kind of thinking.
Yeah. That's okay. All right.
Yeah. And let me talk about the Christian thing, because I totally forgot about that. It's something that obviously God has to open the door for that. And because my grandparents had connections with the government, and at the time they were actually still working with the government they were actually like a police equipment business. Essentially, they would get equipment that police agencies in China would need, and they would help supply the police. And so we had a lot of existing contacts with people, and there's a funny story with that, because China is really about who you know. It's not about who or what you are. When we used to go into China, now you'd have to apply for a visa beforehand before you even get into the country. You don't even go to the airport without having that visa. They won't even give you a ticket if you don't have one. Back in the day, it was just go to the country first and then go into this office, and then they'll give you kind of issue you one right there. I think Thailand does that right now. And so we'd go there to the office, every time we go in, and there'd be this waiting room with people just sitting there waiting for their things to get approved to get a visa into the country. They're just sitting in there. And my dad would just make a phone call. This person would come out and grab us and then bring us inside. And then there'd be this lady, this one time, this lady was just on her phone. She was just playing on her phone, and she had a whole stack of papers and passports, and she's not doing any of them. And the guy walks up, hands her our passports and our papers, and she just opens it, stamps it on. We'd have a short little chit chat, and then just gives it back to us, and then we leave, and she just goes back to playing on her phone. And so it's I think there was a divine appointment of the family being in a high position in the government and allowing us to go back into the country through that same channel to be able to do the things that we do or were doing at the time, for the country. And ultimately, they now know what my dad does. They know who he is, just the affiliations that he has with government, with different schools, universities, and the work that he's doing with disaster relief, social work, suicide prevention, counseling, family counseling. At one point, they wanted us to teach them what VBS was, which is Vacation Bible School, which is kind of you hear these things about, prosecution in China, but at the same time, we don't understand that God's a God of opportunity and doors open. He can open doors that, man forces shut. There's just a whole bunch of opportunity that my dad has been able to, with the blessing of God, to open up different avenues of ministry and things to happen in the country. So
it's so fascinating. I'm sure you did. I'm not sure if you did, but Joe Rogan had that podcast interview with the gal. I can't.
North Korean lady. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I know what you're talking about.
Korea. And she talked a lot about China's stronghold on North Korea, and they're pulling the strings, and about all the atrocities that happen. And it's just so fascinating. a different world. We have zero clue. Those of
Yeah.
us who are born and raised in America or Canada, even, like, it's just not, it's not, just don't get it.
Absolutely. Yeah. And the way that China has developed so quickly, like I don't, the version of China that my dad grew up in is not what I see. And even just hearing about the upbringing that my wife's family had, like not even from a position of being high in the government, like it is just, it scares me to think that this stuff is actually happening in North Korea to like an even worse degree, like to the nth degree, like eating tree bark and stuff like that. Like she was telling me that her family did that, which was like, how are you still living? But yeah, this just gives us perspective, you know?
I was just going to say, I talk to everybody I can about that podcast for one thing, if for multiple reasons. I mean, it made me very passionate about some of the things going on in the world, but mostly you need to have a perspective. Like, you know, woe is me who maybe made $1,000 less this month than last month. I'm sitting here going, that $1,000 is more than most people see in a lifetime. So like, you know, it's just that whole perspective thing. It's so fast lost. I mean, I lose it in a heartbeat, and I think most of us do, but you've got to engage in those types of opportunities to hear what life is like on the other side of in other countries and in oppressed worlds. All right. So you're in Vancouver, you are going through this self-actualization, this learning about yourself. I know that you did some, SAS, which is software as a solution. So what was your role in that? Kind of what have you done through all of this searching?
Yeah. So, in my story, when I was talking about, when we were transitioning back to Canada, at the time we were doing a ministry in China. We started Young Life there, and I'm sure some of the listeners are, have a familiarity with Young Life. We started the team there and just really didn't feel, and this is part of that search is cluing into that intuition. Whenever you feel something isn't right, like dig into that, like really lean into that, because it's really telling us something is not right. There's, you start to question what the state of things and start to really ask questions about, well, what does this mean for me? What is the next door I'm supposed to walk? What is the next step for me to take? And so, we were transitioning, like I said, I couldn't lead the marriage. And so I needed to be in an environment where I can at least lead the marriage on the language basis. That was the most basic thing. We were looking at Hong Kong because there was a Young Life team in Hong Kong. And because Hong Kong speaks there's two languages I speak there, Cantonese and English. And so it was a place that I could lead people. I really felt at home in Hong Kong. And so we went there kind of to see if it was a good fit. And the leader that was there kind of walked me through Strengthsfinder. And it was one of the things that Young Life does. Actually, every single year, they'll lead 40 of their staff through Strengthsfinder. And, for them to find out whether or not youth ministry is something for them to keep going on. And you can kind of see how this is kind of backwards for Young Life. On one hand, they want really, really good people. These 40 people are potentially really, really good people, but they also want them to like live out their purpose, right? If this isn't their calling, they should really move on to doing something else. And so after doing the Strengthsfinder, and he walked me through it, he really told me like, hey, your strengths, like you'd make a great counselor, great coach. And at the time, I was just like, that's too much information for me. I was just not ready for that, to make that leap yet. And I think it was an intended to have that feeling. And God was really like, yeah, you're not really ready for that. And so because I learned about that, I realized that, hey, China and Hong Kong isn't our thing. We got to really go back to Canada and kind of start from scratch there. We went back to Canada and it was just like, I needed to put a circumstance, right? Circumstance took over, needed to put food on the table and bring in some money, right? And so I started kind of doing this trade, right? Like wanting to do trade because, everybody says you should do a trade kind of, with external, rewards or whatever, saying that you can make a lot of money and whatnot. I'm 5'7", so I might be just slightly taller than you, but like, just like starting from the bottom for trade, it's like, you're doing all the heavy lifting and I'm not big. I mean, I can see that you got muscle to you. I'm really like stick thin, like maybe Legolas, I guess you could say. And, lifting those things that, guys like you would be able to do that easily. It was so hard for me. So it was straining on my body. It was straining on my psyche. It was not life-giving work. It was just draining, stressful. And also the time with my family, I didn't have. And so I made the decision to quit. And it was just like, I didn't want to be that kind of father. My dad was not never there, but rarely there. And it's not the quantity, it's the quality of time. I just didn't have a lot of quantity, nor did I have a lot of quality with my dad. And so I wanted to be more of a present father. And that was what actually superseded the police dreams too, is that I wanted to be a more present father. And at the time I felt that being a police officer, for one, and this isn't saying that, police officers don't lead perfectly healthy marriages or be good fathers, is that they, you hear about the divorce rate of police officers and you could also get shot on the job, and then all of a sudden your life is uprooted. You pass away on the line of duty, and your kids are now suddenly fatherless. I didn't want to be that, and so that goal superseded that. And so once I made that decision to quit, my dad was like, "Hey, you understand the nonprofit side of China ministry? Why not come back on?" And so I went back on with them, and even at the time they were already like, "Hey, like don't rely on this as a forever income. Like this is something that will dry up. Recessions or whatever, depressions happen, and funds get nonprofit funds get sucked up, and people have to start getting cut kind of from support." And so we kind of went back to the drawing board, just figuring out what God was wanting me to do. And it's funny because he's always had this like entrepreneurial spirit inside of me that I knew was there, just never. I just didn't know what I didn't know. I guess the answers or the questions that I needed, I just didn't know what they were. And then at that point, it was just like, hey, I got down on my knees and I prayed. I was like, God, what do you have for me? Like, what do you want me to do here? And it's funny because right after I got off the prayer, just like I was on Google, it's just like, hey, ideas. I think it was like 2016. I think I typed in, and stumbled on this video. This guy was talking about digital marketing and running an online business. I'm a really techie guy. I understand the internet. People always come to me with like VHS, DVD, VCD, whatever issues they have. They'd always come to me, and I thought that was like super strange. But so started my own digital marketing agency, doing SEO, doing lead generation, to various successes and failures. And when I look at that, and actually I'll probably touch on that later on, is it wasn't life-giving work for me. And I just really felt like something just wasn't right. And I also had like a kind of a falling out with my brother in terms of certain business, collaboration stuff. And then just transitioned into kind of the software as a solution, as a service business, because there's a piece of tech that I was using for my lead generation that I really felt that I could really help coaches with. Coaches typically, you'll hear they have a lot of issues with tech, and they don't automate a lot of their systems. And so I transitioned into the SaaS space and called myself a tech coach of sorts. And so in the course of doing that, it was actually life-giving work for me. I felt really alive, and I was interacting with people, and I was helping people, and I just loved the interactions I had with coaches. But as I'm going through that, random coaches were just telling me, hey, like you should totally think about being a life coach, like being a coach yourself. And that to me was like, whoa, like I've come such a long way. Like that journey from starting the digital marketing agency to whenever I made the decision to jump into being a coach, that was a span of like 4 years.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's a lot of growing that happened, a lot of things that had to happen, had my daughter there. And actually, if you look back from, when I found out about my strengths, to doing the digital marketing agency, to the SaaS thing, and then to the life coaching thing, the digital marketing agency thing was maybe like 20% of the way to my strengths. I was starting to kind of coach businesses, right? I'm doing coaching in essence, but it wasn't life-giving, right? Because it was just like, there's just still that 80%. Doing the tech stuff, I really felt that was like 80% of the way there. And then what about that remaining 20%? And so once I did the jump into the life coaching stuff, man, it was like the universe exploded in my eyes. And all of a sudden I was opening up to so many possibilities. I was impassioned in everything that I did, and went through this like discovery process of transformation, and realizing that I had to undergo that myself before I could even speak into that in somebody else. And like God really walked me through like a step-by-step methodology of how to discover what those things were. And it all really started from inside. Whereas the other decisions I've made have all been exterior motives or exterior rewards that just ultimately didn't fulfill. Like I already felt that I didn't have to go to the end of the road to know that that lifestyle wasn't going to be something fulfilling for me. And so, yeah, I embarked on this crazy transformation. There's a lot of things like, with money, mindset, thoughts, beliefs, assumptions, like there's just everything was related. And now whenever I look at the world, it's all connected. It's all related, very tangible things that I do impact tangible results in the future for everybody around me. And so, yeah, that's kind of a long way to answer that question, but like, there's a lot of intricacies also to that story. But until I started to live from the inside out, the world like didn't make sense. Like I had to start answering those questions internally before it all really made sense to me and understand what my contribution is on this planet.
Yeah, it's not a quick journey. And one of my goals is to almost, if anybody will listen, is to push them into the journey as early as possible.
Yeah.
You need to go search who you are. You need to find out what gives you energy. You need to find out what your calling in life is, what your passion is. Yeah. Now, let me be very clear. There's this whole passion drive. I love passion, but sometimes you've got to start doing something to know if you're passionate about it. You did some things and you're like, no, that's not it. And I want so badly to scream from the mountaintops, trying something and changing is not failure. It is growth. So that's something I'm just really passionate about. Like, just try some stuff. You might fail.
Yeah.
Good. Because all it's going to do is give you one more step closer to where you really need to be. Yeah. I'm trying to hit a home run right out of the gates. Right.
Right.
It's just it's a great way to fail overall.
That's very interesting you say that, because if you look at the journey, it's like, I wasn't ready to make that jump 6 years ago. Like I had to go to the trade job. I did other jobs, various jobs in between, like, car detailing and all these other things. I had to have those experiences, have my second child, and have issues with my wife. And there was a lot of development things that had to happen there. So it's a fine balance. I totally understand what you mean. Cause whenever I talk to like 20-year-olds, it's like, one of the steps in my methodology is actually looking at prior themes and experiences that you've had, and then using that to form a basis of where to go next.
That's good.
Sorry. And so it's like, well, if you're too young and you've never had these experiences, like how do I know what I enjoy if I've never tried my hand at anything, or like I'm straight out of college, like I've never had a 9-to-5, but like how do I know that thing? And I think each person is different. Everybody's hands are different. Everybody's cards are different. And so there's just a lot of intricate details here and different angles that are possible here. But I totally understand what you mean. Like you have to have gone through a bit of a journey before you actually even understand the importance of why having a purpose exists.
Yeah. Don't get me wrong. There's people that I think know it from the gates. They hit the gates running and they know what they're wanting to be, unless they're lying to us in the world, which is a possibility too. I mean, lying to themselves in the world is a possibility, but there are people like, hey, I knew from age 5, I wanted to be a doctor. They go be a doctor. They're incredibly talented. They're called for it, and it gives them life. I think a lot of people resign to the fact that I'm just making money and it's providing for my family. What does it matter how I feel about it? And I feel like, wow, I'm really sorry you're missing so much.
Yeah. And that's the thing about, that's why BOF is so crazy. Like, the Brotherhood of Fatherhood is it's funny because you're describing literally a ton of fathers out there is they, identity is the first piece of my methodology. It's like we're identified as, sole breadwinners. We're providing luxuries for our kids, vacations. I'm supposed to stress out and work a 9-to-5 or 12-hour, 13-hour shift to provide for my family and not see my family. That is the norm, which is that's it's such a stark way of looking at a man's life. Like, our responsibility supersedes the food that we put on the table. Like, we are called to live a life of example. We are to emulate to our children how life is to be done. If you don't want your children to live the way you're doing, if it's stressful for you, man, think about how stressful it's going to be for your kids. It's not going to be not stressful for them. And so shouldn't you be more focused on living, showing that example? And I know circumstances lead people down certain roads, and you could be answering this when you're 40 or 50 or whatever. But like, if you have the opportunity to hear this message now, like, really look into, like, why is it you like people always talk about, what is your why? Like, what is your why? Like, are you on this planet to just be a person that fills wallets and fills bank accounts with money to buy the food on the table? Like, no, like, that is not what you were created to do. And so there's a lot of wasted potential. It's funny, this morning I was in the shower and just thinking about, what does that look like? I'm a very, like, imaginary person, and so I like to think about things very, very tangible and in an imagery kind of way. I think of a cheetah like treading water in water. Like, he's just like trying to run super fast, but he's not really going really fast. Like, and he can try that in the forest, he can try it in a desert, he can try it in different places. If you're not in a savanna, you're not going to run that speed. And so that's why it's stressful, right? Gay Hendricks says something like, stress and conflict comes from a lack of ownership and acceptance. And so, what ownership of what? Ownership of and acceptance of what? It's like ownership and acceptance of ourselves. We never took the time to discover who we are inside here. And so we want to answer these questions of, what am I doing? What am I supposed to do with my life? What am I supposed to, like, who am I? Even the question of who I am, they don't even know. And so we pursue these external things thinking, this is what is my contribution. This is what I'm meant to do. Somebody in school told me that I would make a good doctor. And so here I am as a doctor. And then they reach this point where they're like, why am I so unfulfilled? Well, you haven't answered those deep questions. Like, you don't even know who you are. Like, how can that, no wonder you're so stressed out. And that just contributes to everything else. Yeah, work is not life-giving for you. You take more time to de-stress. Suddenly you're taking it out on your kids. And now I have these marriage issues. And then later on you get these health issues. Like, that could pretty much be the story of the world. The modern world is why is the state of things the way it is because we didn't take responsibility as fathers. We didn't take responsibility as men, and even females, like mothers too. There's just, every person has this responsibility that has pretty much has the world, the state of the world in their hands.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Yeah. Well, I knew it was obvious to me from early on that you think a lot about things, and I mean, obviously we got to know each other through the Brotherhood group, and you go and you write and you lay down these things in that group, and my brain just goes, whoa, wait, like, reread that. It's deep. A lot of it's really deep. I think a lot of people probably don't even take the time to consume it, but I wish people would, because there's a lot of really great things in there. Where did this passion come from? I mean, you've talked a little bit about it, but like, is this something you're thinking about all the time? Because these aren't things that just, like, I could put pencil to paper and come up with, like, out of the blue. What's your inspiration?
Yeah, I really think that, like, and this is like my transformation really, I would say, is in the last 6 months. And it's looking back on that journey, it's been a real crazy growth period, and it's very tangible for me. Like, seeing who I was, and actually, let's not even talk about that. Gay Hendricks has a book called The Big Leap, and he talks about this thing called the zone of genius. And there's 4 different zones. There's the zone of incompetence, zone of competence, and there's another a zone of anyways, I forgot the third one. The last one is zone of genius. And so you could say that the SAS play for me, that was my zone, the third zone. Zone of genius is where you start to, like, spiral upwards. And so in this transformation, I've kind of unlocked this capacity in myself, because I have this passion all of a sudden to want to grow, to want to go deeper, and really it was a process of shining light in areas in my inner being that I'd never shown before. And in coaching, you really understand, it's like, man, like you are your worst and best client. And so how deep you're willing to go is how deep you can go with a client. And so I had to do all this crazy amount of like identity stuff, it just mindset, beliefs, and all this stuff, like things that I've harbored for the longest time. I had to break all those things down. People were catching me whenever I wasn't being compassionate, was not self-loving. They're like, why are you verbalizing that way? And I was like cluing into these things. I was like, yeah, why was I saying these things? Like growing up through high school, I always told myself I was terrible at math. And it ended up that I graduated with grade 10 math, which was like the bare minimum. And so then I thought, I was like, well, man, if I thought about it differently, if I thought I'm actually pretty good at math, like the result could have been that I graduated with grade 12 math like the rest of my classmates. And then that carried on to things like reading. Like I would say, oh, I always fall asleep when I read. It's just like a reoccurring thing that I told myself. And guess what? Whenever I read, I fall asleep. It's like, well, yeah, because you have that thought. And so understanding the self-coaching model, which is like, circumstances trigger thoughts, thoughts trigger emotions, emotions trigger actions, and actions trigger the results. The result ultimately ties back to the thought, because the thought causes the emotion, and then you kind of enter this like slippery slope. And so understanding that was also really good, because it was like, our thought is what limits everything. How you think will determine the results we see because of the actions that we take, and how we feel in life. If we're generally thinking that life sucks, well, guess what? Life is gonna suck. You're right. But if you think that life is gonna be awesome, you're also right, because life is gonna be awesome. You're gonna find things that are awesome. And so in writing those posts, I just, my mind has always been, it's funny, growing up, I always thought that I was strange. I always thought that my thinking was like, why do I think about these things? I almost thought like I had a female mind, because it was just like always thinking about emotions of people. Like my empathy is really, really high on my strengths. It's like number 2. And just like different things and ideas were always like in my head that I just like couldn't really, like, again, like the cheetah in water. It was just like, I was running super fast, not knowing why I was running super fast in the water, but not going anywhere until I got into the savannah. It was like, boom, it all made sense. My prey is right there. I see myself as a cheetah, and I tell myself that I'm the fastest in the land. And so what can I not do? And so in that, I find, because I have this drive for wanting people to think more deeply about things, I'm always very, like, I've always been very present in whatever moment. And there's a good story with that. Is in China, there's a lot of pickpockets. And in China, technology is also really, really prevalent. And so people will be walking down the streets on their phones, clueless to the point when somebody's like digging through their stuff in their purse. And the street that I lived on, whenever I was in China, a lot of pickpockets. And I would just notice people. I just look at people, read their emotions, and anticipate plays, almost like I was an athlete. And I'd always speak up whenever somebody was getting pickpocketed, because it was like, hey, like, pay attention. Like you're getting robbed right before your eyes and you don't even know it. And so it's like cluing into people. It's like, hey, like what, and if I filter myself, the stuff that I type on these posts, if I filter myself, then I'm limiting what I'm giving people. And so I guess you call these garbage posts, even though it's not garbage to people. It's really getting what my thoughts are on paper for somebody, because I don't know how this could contribute to somebody else. I don't know how this could spark something in them. And that's not on me. That's my job, is just to take my heartfelt information, the things that I have. Like I struggle to sleep sometimes because I have these like thoughts about different posts. I'll literally take out my phone again and then write down the heading that I had in my head, and then mess up my circadian rhythm again. And just wanting to, I just want people to think. Like I just want people to be more present right now. And so it just made so much sense to be helping people with life purpose, with their mindset, with their beliefs, with their being, and also fathers, because I want them to be more fulfilled. I want them to take less time to de-stress. I want them to be more present with their kids, because their kids are going to go on to impact the world. There's just such real world consequences to every single action. So even in my business, it's like, man, I got to be present. I got to be always writing posts and thinking about how I can, come at a different angle and be, also as loving and understanding as I can, to just clue them into, hey man, like this is a real issue. that you need to answer. These are questions that we all need to answer. Have you asked them? So,
yeah, I think, we are very good at filtering ourselves, men in general. And I think a lot of men filter themselves. If they really put into the group what they were thinking, negative, positive, both, I think we'd have a pretty flourishing group of men growing. I think, there is some impact there. And I know it's digging in on somebody. It's somebody's like, oh, there's that guy again posting. I need to look at that, because I remember him talking about being present with the kids, and I was really struggling with that. Sometimes I go through periods where I'm like, is anybody paying attention to anything? Just even 2 days ago, somebody called me and said, like, look, I listened to this one podcast you just did. It was a solo podcast. I'm like, no, I'm listening to this. That talk in my own head, right? It's so untrue. And he's like, you really, really pushed some beliefs in me. And I had to really like, whoa, I'm missing the mark here. And I'm like, oh my gosh, like you got that out of that. That's awesome. So I just think like when I read your posts, and I've told it to you before, like how many guys are actually reading that? It's not really what matters. It's the guys that are reading it that it's resonating with. That's what matters. And the audience size doesn't matter. It's the impact that matters. So I encourage you to keep going.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And actually it's funny because I want to say, like, having done that work inside, I know that I'm unstoppable. And so if somebody doesn't resonate with my post, or somebody reacts negatively to it, it doesn't affect me anymore. It doesn't matter. It's not for you. Well, great. Then that means you're probably not the right audience. And you should move on to something else. And maybe it's not the time. There's just so many dynamics to like so many angles to it that I can't control all of it. And why would I, if you want more of it, man, then that means I got to post more of it. And so literally talking to my coach yesterday, she was like, well, am I posting too much? Can you ever post too much? And if you just think about it, like if you have like Denzel Washington's one of my favorite actors. He has these like a lot of like amazing quotes and stuff. Like how much of Denzel Washington can I get? Will I ever listen to the point where I'm like, oh, he's so annoying? Like I would never. Like I'd want more of it. Or even Jordan Peterson is another good example. Is I can listen to his thoughts and his ideas like so much. Like I listen to his podcasts for like hours and hours on end. I don't ever get bored of it because it feeds something inside of me that each person has a desire for. And so, on that note is just like, keep putting things out there. Don't be afraid to do it. Like, and it doesn't matter what you put out there, because whoever doesn't resonate with it, well, good. Then they don't resonate with it. That's what you want. You're don't shoulder that burden and be like, well, then I should stop posting. No, that's limiting your contribution.
I think that's the difference between kind of having a calling, really understanding your purpose, understanding your identity. Identity plays a big role. Like, hey, that didn't fall on that guy's ears. Big freaking deal. Like,
right.
And it's a very, very hard lesson to learn. And it takes many, many years to kind of weed through your own emotions and get to a point. Some people are born that way. Maybe a little indifferent, which is not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about, you care, but you care about the ones who are listening.
Right. Like you can't plant a seed of doubt in me. Like there's no way. Like I'm already I'm a cheetah in the savannah. There's nothing better than that already. And so there's no doubt. Whereas yesterday talking to this girl, she's like, oh, we want to talk about podcasts and stuff. And the one question that really threw doubt in her mind is, how do I monetize this? Well, then I was like, well, maybe being a podcast or whatever is not what you're meant to do. And so now we're kind of talking about whether or not we should discover together what that's going to be like to discover life purpose and what that is, because why are you answering questions like that when you don't even know who you really are? You just skip over steps. Anyways.
Yeah. Oh, you just opened a can of worms about monetizing podcasts. Yeah.
Hey, we got to keep going with that, right? That's the same note. Is you got to keep going. Viewership might be low right now, but man, one day somebody's going to really resonate with the stuff, and it's going to, those things are going to accumulate. Doesn't mean that we shouldn't keep going and keep
absolutely
pushing it.
Yeah. In fact, I've had great numbers, and I've had decent numbers, and I've had bad numbers. It's very fluctuation. And the message is I don't think I've ever thought about monetizing this podcast outside of maybe selling some shirts or something. And mostly that just supports it because, you know, I have a team that does all the editing because I'm just not there in my own personal editing skill. And, and nor do I want to take the time to do it. And it's just not where I'm at. But, you know, I'd be stupid to say, well, I wouldn't love to earn a few bucks, but really what's the point? The point is, I have a passion for men to really be challenged and want to grow and share other men's stories with them so that they can learn from what other men have gone through or going through or are experts in. So it's working. It's working because that's what my idea was.
Right. Yeah. And it feeds you too. I mean, and that's a very, and the, you know, that change that you're talking about, you're impacting the environment, you're impacting the economy too, because people are more driven. And that's ultimately what I'm into, is like, because it's all connected. It's like, if I get you into doing what's your life purpose, you're going to come to life doing what you do, and money's just going to come. Like, right. And then at that point you can support people like us or your podcast. There's just too many things in this universe that is already in your favor because you're continuing to be consistent and persistent in what you're doing.
Yeah. Yeah. Same to you. I mean, and that's a really good message for men. It's like, you know, you just don't know what impact you're having all the time. And that's okay. Yeah. So as long as it's fueling you and it's the right thing.
Right.
Well, awesome. I want to wrap up, but only because of time, but I want to ask you a few questions, that I think help other men. What's something that's a non-negotiable in your day that you feel every man should do?
I think the self-care thing is really what stands out for me, because I'm in a lot of other groups too, like men's groups and mental health groups and men's mental health groups. And that's a fact. That's one of the things that often gets overlooked, is that as a man, that I need to show that I have it all together and that I just buck up, shut up, and do what I need to do to provide for the family. Like my well-being is okay to be overlooked. I think that is a load of crock. And I think that like self-care is so important. And so, you know, work that into your routine. Like, it's funny because I always seem to reference Gay Hendricks. He has a quote where he says, you know, you're tired of doing things that feed others and feed others around you, but you know, in the end, you're not feeding yourself. And that ultimately just doesn't sit with me, because, you know, stress from not owning up to yourself is one thing, but stress over time is going to shut down your immune system, and it's going to cause adverse health effects, which who wants to be at that place where they have, you know, stare down cancer or have a coronary or whatever, and be like, well, I want to answer these questions now. At that point, you know, it could be said that it's too late. And so self-care is definitely what is needed. And also starting from a place of internal first. Like, the mind is what drives the bit that moves the body, that does the body. And so if you're doing pull-ups or chin-ups or whatever, and you tell yourself you can't do it, you're not going to be able to pull up another one. And so work on the mind too. See that as a muscle. Take back your mind, and everything else will start to fall into place, because then you'll be clear also to understand what are the questions that I need to ask. What is the most pressing thing right now for me? What is a dominant question that I have that needs answering? And then from that place, knowing what are the next steps, because suddenly you have the right answers. Now it's like, well, from that place, what's the next step for me? What is the best next step to take here? So
yeah, that's good. That's good. Okay. Cool. If you pass away and your kids are grown, what is the legacy that you'd like to see? Like, you're looking in, you're seeing action or their family or whatever it is. What would make you think I did well?
Most directly, I think, you know, if I see my children go through the transformation that they need to go through, living from a place of inside out rather than outside in, living in their purpose, and not letting circumstance divert them and continue to pursue being change agents in the world, and even for God's kingdom, I think that would be all. I would feel like my life is accomplished. I want to create a movement. I want to create a wave of people. And I listened to your Matt Chenard podcast you guys did. Some of the things he was saying was really resonating with me, like wanting to have a resort, one day, like where you can have people come and just starting a movement of fathers that just get it. I want to be one of those real coaches, not the ones that just like want to get rich quick and stuff. And so that's why I had to like build those things brick by brick. I think I want to know that I made a real tangible growth in the universe.
It's awesome. It's awesome. So you coach. So I want to make sure you have an opportunity to kind of plug yourself. I think it's really important. Obviously, if you're in the Brotherhood of Fatherhood group, Theophilus is easy to find because he's posting. You're posting. I'm talking like you're not here. Woo! I was concerned I wasn't saying your name right. Like that little mental trail that goes off. So, like it's the teacher in me. So people can obviously get a hold of you there, and I'm unashamed to say, like, do it. Like, ask the dude some questions. Where else can they find you?
Yeah. So, I'm on Instagram also, Theo86Z, and I'm also on LinkedIn. I think the Facebook is the best way. That is really where I call my home, and posting on social media on my account, and feel free to add me because I'm very open-minded. Like, I've been approached by MLMs, even though I know they're from MLM, like, network marketings. Like I give them the opportunity to say their thing. And if I'm able to help them in any way, I will do that. That's a big part of who I am, is I love helping others. The service to other people is a recurring theme in my life. And so, add me, and I just love to chat. I never try to be pushy with anything. If you're in the place and time to have these conversations, I will be intentional about that. I just love speaking about transformation. I love speaking about internal workings and beliefs, and I love the community. I want to also thank you, Scott, for what you do. A lot of the things that you do gets overlooked in the group, and I just feel that more people need to notice, right, that you're doing a great thing and great service for people. And I'm just happy that and even this opportunity to be able to be here to speak with you. I've taken a lot from you. And yeah, I just can't wait to see what else is in store for this community.
Yeah, it's been fun. It's been really fun. But let me stop and say thank you. Thank you very much for the encouragement and those words. And early on, I asked you, hey, like, you have a message to tell? Come on the podcast. You're like, oh, wait, slow down here. But I think the timing was ideal. The timing was right. We've had a chance to kind of chat. We got on the phone and talked, and even just that month, like from when we had that conversation till now, the growth that I've undergone was just ridiculous. And so, like, at the time, I really felt like, hey, like I wanted to be sure. I wanted to make sure that I had myself some preparation, and I really did, and really leaned into it. Steer into the fear has been my phrase, and so. I love that. Yeah, I'm the purpose is greater. Your purpose has to be greater than your fear. So steer into the fear fits right into that. Yeah, I had a shirt made, purpose with the greater than sign, fear. And I was gonna sell it through the Brotherhood of Fatherhood group, and I'm like, well, I'll sell like 3.
You should do it. I'll buy one of those for sure. I might buy 2 of those.
Matt Chenard will be another one that buys it. Him and I, by the way, just a little plug for everybody. Him and I have a new podcast coming out. I'm like,
oh, nice.
I'm 4 podcasts wide right now. So I have my business VAs for Gyms podcast, which is basically just like, listen to why we're so awesome. If you're a business owner, why you should be using us. Another plug. Number 2, I have Brotherhood of Fatherhood, which is absolutely passion project. Love every moment of it. Number 3 is Stories That Grow. Stories That Grow is for entrepreneurs, business owners, coaches. I have over 20 episodes recorded, and it hasn't even launched. It launched in September. Wow. So another plug, please, everybody, even right now, it's just the trailer. Go give me a 5-star review and subscribe, because that is what will help this thing get. That's what I didn't do with Brotherhood of Fatherhood. And I'm asking you that for Brotherhood of Fatherhood podcast. Take the 3 minutes, go on podcasts on Amazon, or not on Amazon, on Apple Podcasts, and rate my shows, please. Like, this is how we get out there. So the other one, which we haven't launched yet, because I'm going with the same theory of Stories That Grow, getting a real nice bank, getting it really built up, really building out everything right, is with Matt Chenard. It's called Principles of Growth. And that one emulates a lot of what I talk about here, but it's solely on mindset of growth. What do you need to do? What are some things that will help you grow? In fact, I got my ideas for my last solo podcast, 5 things that help you finish strong. We did a podcast and it was 6 things that help you finish strong. And I took 5 of those and put them into the Brotherhood. So like, just the concepts that really are going to, if you want to grow, those podcasts right there, the Stories That Grow, Brotherhood of Fatherhood, and Principles of Growth, like, they're, I'm very biased, but they're awesome.
Wow. No, so, that's awesome.
Yeah. But Matt will be really happy to hear that you took something out of that.
I've reached out to him already too. I think we just the things that you guys were saying was just spot on. And
you reached out to Matt already?
I already did. As I was listening, before he even got to the resort part, I was already like reached out to him. I was like, hey, like, fellow Canadian transformational coach. There's just so many touch points. Like, I can't avoid that. And so steer into the fear, right? It's like, I don't know how he's going to respond, but that's not on me. I just make a new friend. Same thing I did with you. So, men out there, fathers out there, just go out there and just do it. Yeah. You got nothing to fear. We're not monsters. We're so far away from each other. There's nothing. And so I think you should just do it.
Yep. That's awesome. I'm glad you reached out to Matt. Such an amazing person. Theo, thank you so much for your time. I know you were looking forward to it. I was looking forward to it. Everything in the universe was trying to stop us from getting here today.
Yeah.
You and I both hit snags and we're like, no, we're doing this. So thank you for doing that, brother.
Yeah. Thank you for the time, man.
Thank you for listening to the Brotherhood of Fatherhood podcast. If you enjoyed the podcast, be sure to share it with your friends, your family, and follow us on social media. If you are a father, make sure you join our Facebook group, the Brotherhood of Fatherhood. Hit the subscribe button and tune in next time for more podcasts from the Brotherhood of Fatherhood.